Our first speaker this evening is Michael Chanak. Some of you may know him as Goose or Mother Goose. He is a community activist, a board member of the Ohio Lesbian Archives, and a Procter Gamble retiree.
Good evening. It's true, my boy name is Michael Chanak, and I am also known as the Goose. When I approached Patty Schwartz, Patty, raise your hand. I want everybody to see this wonderful lady who chaired this event. Thank you, Patty. You're the best. When I asked her for the privilege of speaking with you this evening, it wasn't because I felt that I personally represented the many diverse faces and lives that HIV/AIDS has impacted. I was 32 years old in 1981 when the pandemic began. And like many of you here this evening, I have seen many deaths, much loss, and I've also seen great progress. And I think we're all here this evening in hope for a cure. I also realized, turning 73 in October, that there was part of my own personal life I've never shared about my journey with HIV. Some of my oldest friends in Cincinnati do not know this. You see, in 1972, a year after I graduated from Kent State University, I used to go down to what was called the Kent Gay Liberation Front meetings, and I would call it that era's lesbian potluck meets Tinder. I met a young man just like I was. His name was Larry A. Myers Jr., and we became friends, romantic partners for years, friends always, and certainly sisters. Larry. Of course, fast forward a few decades, when I was volunteering at the old community center, the GLBTQ Community Center in Northside, I volunteered along with the late Bill Abney, who also passed of AIDS. He was a social worker for the Hamilton County Jobs and Family Services. Now, if you know anything about social workers, they have questions, and they ask questions. And sometimes they're uncomfortable questions. And he said, Michael, I noticed that you never talk about the losses that you encountered in your life or your friends. And he speculated about survivor's guilt and all that sort of thing. And I don't know if I had the right answers for Bill, but this much I know. In November of 1988, my friend, Larry A. Myers Jr., passed on from complications of HIV. And a few weeks before his death, he called me and he said, Michael, I don't want to die. And I'm sure I stumbled around for a few minutes, and I finally blurted out, I know, Larry, I love you. And so it was for Larry. And being Michael, I was always a person that kind of put my head down and shoved things away and kind of powered through it. And at that point, I was very active in the community and particularly had many friends in the HIV community because of the many deaths that some of you have experienced in the audience this evening. And by chance, I also got a job at P&G in '85 as a technician at the old Sharon Woods Technical Center. I've lived so long that they've now torn it down recently. So In any event, I did something crazy for 1986 at Procter. I went to the Gay Pride Parade in Cincinnati and managed to get myself photographed by WCPO kissing the late Dr. Bob McNee, a former geography department chair and geography prof. And of course, in those days, by Monday, everybody knew about Michael, and certainly it seemed that everybody at P&G around the world knew about Michael. So, crazy stuff. And I suppose it should come no surprise to anyone that within 6 months, P&G transferred me to a recently approved oral rinse prescription drug called Paradex, and it was to treat gingivitis, pretty common situation if you listen to the news, watch the ads. But I also discovered very quickly what my role was to be, and that is that they had, in their infinite marketing prowess, figured out that the drug was being used off-label to treat a then very common side effect or complication of HIV, which was thrush or a yeast infection in the mouth. And I realized that they wanted to know about the community through the contacts I had and my other friends, and certainly that happened. But what with Larry's death and so many others, I began to speak up, and I asked, how is it that we can sell product to these people, and yet we cannot claim them in our discrimination policies, our diversity statements? And so that began a 5-year struggle, which eventually ended successfully on September 15th of 1992. And from that, much change ensued in corporate America, and in fact, at the time P&G made those policy changes, they joined the only 3% of the United States Fortune 500 companies that had such protections. Compare and contrast that to today when you pick up the HRC Equality Index, amen? And if you see Vincenzo Volpe with those lovely red heels, he will tell you about the HRC Equality Index afterwards. In fact, I'm informed that some nearly 6,000 gay and lesbian and transgender folks are part of P&G's affinity group. But really the point isn't about P&G, it's about the disruptive force that HIV/AIDS has been and continues to be in our lives. For whether you were in corporate America or in the nonprofit sector, your personal life, it changed and continues to change the world. I look back on all of this and I say, how did a group of, a loudmouth homosexual, a group of allies, and maybe a few closet cases manage this change? And I've concluded that it really didn't have anything to do with us, but it had to do with the people that were in the trenches, the healthcare workers, the scientists, the celebrities, the drag queens, the lesbian blood sisters. Remember them? They donated blood for gay men. Yeah. But ultimately, it belongs to the people who paid the ultimate price with their lives. And in no sense is this pandemic over, and I know that there is much work to be done. But I also know this, that I miss those people, and every damn day I think of Larry, and I miss him so. So now you know a little more of my personal story with HIV and why I asked to speak. I thank you for your kind consideration. Namaste.